Welcome, everyone. If you would like us to begin, you know what needs to be done, ladies and gentlemen. You know what needs to happen, dude. Hello, chat. Hi. Chat, there's two dramas today. Not one, but two dramas today. There's an individual, a British individual, no less, that has made a YouTube video, and I want to react to it. It is a video by Magic the Gathering YouTuber Pleasant Kenobi, who made a video about this play that happened. Yo, Farfa in chat! Father! Father! Congrats on having a kid, brother. Congrats on having a kid, my dude. Anyways, as I was saying about Pleasant Kenobi, he made a video talking about a specific play that happened at an official Magic the Gathering tournament, and the video is explaining that said play is allowed per the rules of Magic, and not only is it allowed, it's something that a lot of players looked at as a really good play, like 5-head play and everything like that. Whereas if you compare that exact same play happening, but with the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh!, that in Yu-Gi-Oh!, Konami would have most likely banned the player from making such a play. So I want to watch the video. I want to see what it is that he talks about, what his like points are to, you know, claim said claim, and we could talk about it. So let's have a look and see what Mr. Obi-Wan Ben Pleasant Kenobi has to say about it.
May 25th, 2022, a Reddit user called Post-Owner Yin Yong informs the Yu-Gi-Oh! Subreddit that the 5-time Yu-Gi-Oh! Championship Series winner, Andre Torres, has been suspended for a year for cheating. But what exactly was the cheat? What was the infraction? During a deck tech or deck profile, I'm going to use the Magic terminology more than the Yu-Gi-Oh! Terms, I'm sorry.
Oh, did I call it profile in Magic?
Just some tokens. You put these on top. They think that you're playing with Sword Soul.
This is the Sword Soul token he's referring to, a physical representation of a token generated by another card in the game. The intent here, explicitly stated by Andres, is to mislead his opponent into thinking he's in a deck that he's not playing.
One thing I'll clarify super quick is Andres actually wasn't banned for a year for this, to my understanding, and I might be wrong about this, but to my understanding, Andres was banned for 6 months for this, and then he also got a second 6-month penalty for attending events while banned, but he disproved it. Like, it was like a miscommunication thing where they thought he went to an event while banned when he didn't, and he proved that he didn't, so they revoked that extra 6 months. So it was a 6 months ban, but still he did get banned for specifically intentionally misleading his opponent into believing he was playing a specific deck. He was using that token specifically to make the opponent think he was playing Sword Soul, and because he stated that out loud in a video, he got banned for it.
This is much more impactful than Magic, where this kind of thing's okay. But this got him suspended for a year.
One thing I disagree with here, he's saying that because you can't mulligan in Yu-Gi-Oh!, he doesn't think that knowing what deck your opponent's on helps because you can't sculpt your hand for it. But in Yu-Gi-Oh! You don't necessarily sculpt your hand. Your opening hand rarely matters. It's more so, can I combo or can I not combo? It's more so you sculpt your end board for that deck, which is why it matters.
Even in my earliest time of going to GPs, people would have the wrong tokens in their deck boxes. So when they pop the lid off their box and the opponent sees the wrong thing, they're going to think they're on a different deck to what they actually are on. It's a little bit of misdirection. It's a little bit of mind games before you begin the game. Hell, one of the greatest bluffs in Magic history, Magic's most famous professional player, Luis Vargas, picking up a token in the middle of a game of Magic, which in turn leads his opponent down the wrong line of thinking. And this costs his opponent the game, and Luis places and goes into the finals of Pro Tour Guilds of Ravnica.
I want to see this play.
I want to unpack how these two compare. They're not quite the same thing, but I do think Luis's example may not fly under Konami when it was kind of applauded by Magic players.
Well, so the big thing, right? So he's talking about saying how in Magic they do this, right? They'll play a specific token to use to make your opponent believe you're playing something or something like that. In Yu-Gi-Oh! Players do that all the time. When you get banned is when you openly state that you did it specifically for that reason, because it shows intent.
4 years ago, Louis Scott Vargas had a stellar run that put him into the 9th Pro Tour top 8 of his lifetime. He was playing what was called mostly white aggro, and he finds himself in a pseudo mirror match against Jeremy Desani on red-white aggro. Luis draws his card for turn and does some thinking. He arranges his mana in a very specific way. This is the first part of the bluff. At Danto, the first 4 allows Luis to make a 1/1 lifelinking vampire for 3 mana, and he signposts this pretty heavily by placing 3 mana to the left and the 4 to the right. He is clearly showing he has mana to make a token.
Yeah, so to my understanding, what this means,
Mana to the left.
I'll break this down for Yu-Gi-Oh! Andies that don't know anything about this, right? To my understanding, this card can either generate a token or produce mana by tapping it, and these 3 cards all produce mana. So he can tap these 3 to use the effect of this to produce a token, which would allow him to survive through, like, the phase of combat. He places this card off to the side. Like, basically, he's very clearly indicating that, like, he's separating the cards to be like, I'm probably just gonna make a token. You know?
But in this particular format, 4 untapped mana including 2 white meant something else as well. So that's since that day, we all think about when attacking into 4 open mana. LSV's deck was playing 1...
Yeah, so Settle the Wreckage, interesting card. I know what this card is, and I don't play Magic, which goes to show just how, like, well-known this card is. Settle the Wreckage basically is like a super-duper blowout if your opponent goes, like, all in with all their guys. So what you can look at it as is he has this card that with 4 mana, he can use this in order to blow out his opponent if he chooses to attack with everything.
It's a huge game changer in the aggro mirrors because you can take out your opponent's board wholesale and leave yours intact because it only kills attacking creatures and can be cast on your opponent's turn.
So for context here, in Magic, right, you don't declare attacks with each thing individually. You choose who all your attackers are at once, and then that's when your opponent would choose their blockers. So if you choose all your guys to attack with, and then they settle the wreckage, you lose everything that you attacked with. So sometimes if you think your opponent has settled the wreckage, you would have to my understanding, you would have to be like attack with less stuff to play around it so that you still keep stuff on your board if they do have settled the wreckage and stuff like that. So if you think your opponent has settled the wreckage, attacking with everything is incorrect.
Jeremy knows LSV has a settle in his list, 1 singular copy, and it has to be considered every time he attacks into 4 open mana. Magic players have had this feeling for a long time now since settle was printed. Time is running out for Jeremy, so he has to make some maneuvers that push him towards just winning and going on to the next game. Aurelia here can block next turn thanks to having vigilance and not tapping to attack, but the rest of the team can go on offense if he wants to try and close out the game. He leans forward and starts mathing out the attack, and Luis does the second part of the 3-part bluff. He begins to start visibly counting himself as if the math actually matters. It doesn't, because the coverage know, and they told the audience, we know now, that Settle the Wreckage is in LSV's hand. That means the math doesn't matter. He can just pay 4 mana and kill everything attacking him, so if he attacks with everything, there's no need to do any counting whatsoever.
The thing that I'll say about this, right, is I still think, like, counting to know how much damage you would take, I don't know how realistic this is in Magic, right? Because in Yu-Gi-Oh, like if I had something to stop battle, I probably still would calculate the damage to know just how much I would take versus like if I do a play to block some attacks or something like that, I would still do the math just to know if I want to block it or not. But I don't know how obvious it is in Magic that if you have settled the wreckage, you are always using that every single time. If that's the case, then I just don't know that.
The audience knows this. Jeremy does not. That's dramatic irony. As Jeremy is counting through and considering his options, we get the third and final part of the bluff. LSV reaches for a token to the side. At Pro Tours, there are tokens for anything that is like makeable by those decks at the side of the game to make the games look nice and clean for the audience. He grabs the Adanto Vampire token as if to suggest he's going to make it or that it matters to this combat, and then he puts it back down.
Yeah, so this is basically what his opponent is like picking what he's attacking with. This to me would be kind of on par with when your opponent summons their 5th monster in Yu-Gi-Oh! And you pick up and start playing with a Nibiru token in your hands. Like you just take it and you're just messing around with this Nibiru token in your hand. Your opponent's fully aware that the card in your hand is a token, right? That to me is what this is you're messing around with a Nib token.
He could choose, if they're doing the math, not to attack fully and just commit in the air with Aurelia and maybe a body on the ground for a trade to force them to kill one of Luis's creatures. Luis's reach for the token is referred to metaphorically by the commentary team as the pen trick, or a version of the pen trick. The pen trick is where an opponent is looking to attack you, and as they go to do it and declare their attack, you reach for your pen to denote that you're planning to change your life total, suggesting you're just going to take the damage, that you have no good blocks, no effects, no spells. Of course, once the attack is declared, you can place the pen back down and move to blocks. It's considered a little bit scummy by some people, but on the whole, the pen trick has been part of Magic for decades.
I'll be honest, I would consider that scummy. If someone did that in Yu-Gi-Oh, I would also probably feel pretty cheesed about it. If I attack with everything, my opponent grabs like pen and notebook and stuff like that and goes, oh, how much damage am I taking? Only for them to go, Mirror Force? I'd probably be like, that's kind of messed up.
Whilst there's a bluffing technique there is pretty known in competitive Magic, it's not that commonly seen. The wonderful part of all this moment on coverage, though, is that one...
That's just BMing, not tactical. I disagree. Say you're playing a game of GOAT format, right? And your opponent has like, I don't know, like a bunch of dudes on board, but if they know that you have like Scapegoat or something like that, that they need all their guys to attack... If they think you have Scapegoat versus if they think you have Mirror Force, they would, like, if they think you have Mirror Force, they'd put one or two of their guys to defense to play around Mirror Force to not lose, versus if they think you have Scapegoat, they'll just put everything to attack to go face over all the GOAT tokens. And doing that is something outside of the game that is influencing the game itself, which I think is specifically what the rules of Yu-Gi-Oh! Are trying to avoid, but we'll talk about that in a sec.
Once LSV puts the token down, Jeremy picks it back up and starts using it to physically map out how the combat's going to go. Absolutely stellar moment for coverage, and I wish we got more of this kind of stuff. LSV confirms that this is the attack, and Jeremy says yes.
So hard that he grabbed the token to like
and Luis then just
math it.
turns his land sideways and reveals his settle, slamming it into play, and the hand is extended. The game is over. LSV has won, and he's on to the finals of Pro Tour Guilds of Ravnica. It is honestly a rather wonderful and exciting moment. It doesn't matter what your opinions of either the players or LSV. It is full of just such interesting sides that you don't see very often. These kind of bluffs aren't...
Well, I mean, could you argue that that's like a moment of competitive Magic? That feels like something that has nothing to do with the game. Like there's a way that you could look at it, which is, I think, the way that most Yu-Gi-Oh players look at it. Was he going to win without that play? Some could argue yes, some could argue no. I can't argue either way because I don't understand the game well enough. I don't play Magic. But there is an argument to be made that if there's something from outside the game that influenced the way the game is, like the way the game played out, you could argue both ways. You know what I mean? I think there is very much a world where in Yu-Gi-Oh, that's like something they're trying to avoid with the game rules. There's a genuine question to be asked. Would Yu-Gi-Oh have banned for making this play?
The absurd part is the only reason I have Settle the Wreckage in my deck is our team wanted one of us to play one Settle the Wreckage so people would be scared of it. And I was like, whatever. We were gonna roll for it. And I was like, whatever. I'll just play it. I don't care. It just sounds funny. I just wanted the story.
Do you feel players should not be allowed to reach to their deck box for no reason? Well, so here's the thing. In Yu-Gi-Oh, you are not allowed to reach into your deck box for no reason. Chat, tell me, in Magic, are you allowed to look at your sideboard mid-game? Yes, you can. See, in Yu-Gi-Oh, you can't do that. In Yu-Gi-Oh, you are not allowed to pick up your sideboard or your side deck and look at it mid-game. You're not allowed to. I think in this scenario, my initial perspective, we'll keep watching the rest of the video, see if there's any extra information. The immediate perspective that I would have is, would Konami ban a player for making a play such as this? Like, would Konami ban a player for picking up a nib token and fucking around with it mid-game? Probably not. The moment that a player admits to, like, having done a specific outside the game thing with the intent for it to have in-game influence is when Konami bans. And the reason why is specifically because Konami talks in their rulebook extensively about intent. The cheating section, if I remember this correctly, and this is off the top of my head, but I believe the cheating section specifically states making an illegal play intentionally. Word for word is how that's written, is that it mentions intention, which is why using a Sword Soul token in a deck that isn't Sword Soul is not cheating, if you're just using it because you like Sword Soul. Because the tokens have the text, this card can be used as any token.
But back to the point at hand, would this fly in Yu-Gi-Oh? I have been told over the years that bluffing in Yu-Gi-Oh is rather non-existent,
Not really a
especially
thing,
in this sense
no.
of you can bluff in Yu-Gi-Oh. I haven't played Yu-Gi-Oh in a while, so I'm going to try not to get things wrong here, but by placing cards face down, that might be not advantageous to do so, or aren't even traps, in order to bluff that you might have a useful trap in that scenario.
Yeah, I mean, you can do that 100%. You're able to, you could set spells and stuff like that. Cards you can't even use on your opponent's turn, like normal spells and stuff. You could set those to make your opponent think you have back row. Is it really advantageous to do? Not really.
But reaching for a token outside the game, well, we don't have an example of that. But if they have the example of the token in the deck box, which got a player suspended for an entire year.
The token wasn't in the deck box. I think he, if I remember right, I think he specifically placed his tokens on top of his extra deck, so they were on the field so that it was very visible.
But I just don't think this grandiose display of misdirection leading to a big win would go through fine with Konami. In the email to Andreas, Konami explained their issue was because it was intentionally used to mislead the opponent. It was classified as misrepresenting the game state, which is wild to me as the game hasn't even started yet. And again, it's not like all Magic players were totally okay with LSV's
I mean, yeah, the argument that the game hasn't started yet is not an actual point, because the moment you sit down at the table with your opponent, anything you say and do like is part of the game, right? I would argue that the match between you and your opponent begins the moment the pairings go up and ends the moment the match flip is signed. Everything that happens in between that is part of your round, part of your match. I understand that the reason why Pleasant Kenobi is arguing that doesn't really change anything. In his mind, Yu-Gi-Oh doesn't have a mulligan system, so what does it matter whether you know what deck your opponent's on before the game starts or something like that? The reason why it matters is because you could arguably tailor your deck differently, your opening board differently. So for that reason, it could have an influence on the game, and because it can have an influence on the game, and the player did said outside the game action with the intent to mislead their opponent into believing that they were playing something else so that they would make that play, that does influence the game in a way that Konami doesn't want. They want the game to be played out entirely in the game rather than outside the game.
Personally, I love it. I love these mind games and 16 chess you can play with small advantages from the stupidest of things. Andreas has said officially on his own YouTube channel that it was ridiculous and he wasn't cheating. He was even arguing the point that actually the deck he was playing played similar cards to the deck he was pretending to be anyway. In Magic, having the wrong token in your deck box is perfectly okay. It is not cheating. You can't misrepresent the game state of a game until the game has begun.
Well, once again, in Yu-Gi-Oh, it is also okay to use any token. It is okay. You can use it. I can use a fucking Nib token, even if I don't play Nibiru in my deck. If I want that to be my Sword Soul token, it can be my Sword Soul token. If I, and maybe I'm playing the Nib token because if I get nibbed, I want to have the correct token and stuff like that, because all tokens have the text that say this card can be used as any token.
People will often use the wrong tokens to represent stuff, tokens that have the correct keyword on them or slightly different stats, and people just know what they are because you explain what they are when you put them into play.
Yeah.
And you can reconfirm as you go on and on. As far as I understand it, this is the same in Yu-Gi-Oh! You can use any token to represent any token. The argument is whether you were intending to misrepresent the board state before it starts or during. That's what gets you suspended or banned. But ultimately, sometimes people just ignore this shit. LSV's deception and mine.
Yeah, I think if I ever sat across from a player and they were wearing like a Sprite t-shirt or had a Life Twin playmat or had a Sky Striker deck box, I would not assume that is the deck that they are playing. I would assume that is probably a deck that they have played and that they end up really liking, but not necessarily a deck that they're playing. Games
are so much better than any of this nonsense, though. They're a high-level player that came from the stars aligning, a singular copy in the board that he happened to draw, and the Adanto being there with a 3 mana, and he bricked that turn. He drew something he couldn't cast, and thus decided to keep the mana up. But the ingenuity came in picking up that token to really sell the bluff. Is this unsporting is the next question, I guess. I know when it happened, a small portion of people online said it was a bit scummy. But that's the real question. Is it scummy or big brain?
It is scummy.
Ultimately, I love this. I love the little micro advantages you can get from body languages and bluffs and signs and tells. When someone draws a card and they sigh a little bit or their shoulders slump and you can tell they've drawn a bad thing, or perhaps they're bluffing. And it's what makes paper Magic so much better than digital, because body language matters. All these things that sort of convert across from other card games like poker or something, the body language.
Well, I mean, at the end of the day, I don't think a trading card game like Magic or Yu-Gi-Oh is intended to be like poker in any way.
Magic and Yu-Gi-Oh and other card games are inherently games about hidden information. You don't necessarily know your opponent's deck list outside of the big events and top 32s and 8s and stuff. Normally the deck lists aren't shown, so you don't know what they're playing.
I feel like in Yu-Gi-Oh, a lot of deck lists are standardized,
either.
but yeah.
That information is also hidden. But on top of that, like, there is things that you just aren't meant to know. Hidden information and bluffing is inherent in the idea of holding a hand of cards your opponent.
Well, so here's a big issue about this, and a big difference between the Yu-Gi-Oh philosophy of things and the Magic philosophy of things. In Magic, correct me if I'm wrong, chat, you are allowed to activate cards without having like a legal target, right? Can you use a card that would search your deck for a dragon if you have no dragons in your deck? I believe the answer is yes, right? Yeah. See, in Magic, you're allowed to activate cards that don't have a legal target or something like fail to find, or you can activate cards that do nothing. In Yu-Gi-Oh, that is not a thing you are allowed to do. In Yu-Gi-Oh, you are not allowed to activate a card or an effect that would do nothing. You must be able to resolve the effect if you are activating it. And having this element of bluffing in the game, this would open up the door to people activating effects that they can't resolve, specifically like trade out, bait out information and stuff like that, and then just go, and that has that intent. You know what I mean? You have to have, it's the intent that is what matters here.
Warhammer is kind of openly more honest, and that's why when people hide shit from you or don't tell you about a stratagem they can use when you didn't know about it, it becomes a lot rougher, a lot more scummy, a lot more gotcha. Magic is so much better when you can fake a combat trick. When your opponent goes to combat and attacks you, and you take a moment to tank and look at your hand and count your mana, and in reality...
Here, chat, let me ask you. When he says like faking a combat trick, let me ask you this. If you're at locals or at a regional or a YCS or something like that, and you go like attack, whatever, and your opponent has just 2 set back row or something like that, and they spend like 2 minutes looking at their 2 set back row. Just thinking. No cards in hand, or they could be shuffling around their hand or stuff like that. And then like you attack them, all that good stuff. You don't kill, and then main phase 2, you pop both back row. Turns out they were normal spells that could not be activated. Would you call a judge and go, yo, this dude took 2 minutes thinking, looking at 2 set normal spells? I would 100% call a judge, because it's, and I'll clarify, that wouldn't be misrepresenting the game state, but that would most likely be considered slow play. Because thinking that long over like not having interaction would be considered slow play. Now, as opposed to, if my opponent believes that I have the ability to, that he has the ability to summon one more guy that could go for game, and I'm looking at my 2 face down normal spell cards to try to bluff him into thinking that I have a response for if he, you know, goes to battle or something like that, and it's just to play around it by just going battle and attacking but doesn't kill me, and then I say in a deck profile, yeah, I was looking at my face down spell cards the entire time, knowing that I couldn't respond to anything, but I was saying thinking after every interaction to make my opponent believe that I had something when I didn't, that would most likely get you in trouble for misrepresenting the game state in Yu-Gi-Oh!
It's big brain stuff that I wouldn't have thought of. It makes me approach Magic in a different way. But it's also kind of, because of this deception and some people disliking it, it has some heel energy that I also think helps to build narratives and stories into competitive Magic that makes it so much more thrilling than just who played the better deck, what cards are more broken and not banned yet. So let me know what you think in the comment section below. Do you think Konami would have let LSV get away with that?
I'll give you the answer. I think, and this is my perspective on this, it's not like 100%. Maybe I'm wrong. From my understanding of the rules, the way I view it, I feel as though if it happened on a Konami stream in a situation like this, I don't think that in the moment Konami would have issued any sort of penalty or anything like that. And I think they wouldn't have issued any penalty if the player didn't at any point state that they did so in order to misdirect their opponent or in order to mislead their opponent. The way that I view it, and the way I would feel most comfortable saying that it probably would work, is that if the play just happened, it would just happen, and that would be that. However, I think if the player in a deck profile or whatever they called it for Magic, in the deck profile or something like that, or on the winner's interview where he was literally talking about that interaction, I feel as though if a player openly admitted to the fact that they only did this, they only did that misdirection of counting and grabbing the token and fucking around with the token or whatever, with the sole intent to make the opponent believe they didn't have anything else, only to get blown out by a card they didn't have knowledge of, I believe that that would be considered misrepresenting the game state in terms of Konami's rules. And if the player clearly said that they did it for that exact reason and only that reason, they would probably get a suspension for it. But I think it is skirting the line. I feel like the line is very gray, and I feel like this is one of those things that gets very, 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 very close to that line. But I think it's on the opposite side of that. It's on the other side of that line. So that's my take on that. Honestly, I'm curious. I know not everyone's gonna agree with me, but let me know what you guys think. Is there a rule that you can't bluff in Yu-Gi-Oh? Yes, there is literally a rule that you can't bluff in Yu-Gi-Oh. I don't know if it's worded like bluffing and stuff like that. We can look. Let's have a look, chat. Let us have a look. Tournament policy, penalty guidelines. Duelists are responsible for maintaining an accurate legal game state at all times. Duelists may not perform actions that would intentionally mislead their opponent or a tournament official about the game state. Black on white. Simple as that, dude. The important word here is the word intentionally. If I make a play that's illegal without knowing that the play is illegal, or without any specific reason why the play is illegal, at that point, you're not cheating. You made an illegal play without the knowledge of having made an illegal play. Man, chat, that was a ruling discussion of the day, dude. I haven't talked about rulings and stuff in a while, but Joseph called me to ask for my opinion on this this video, and I figured, no, fuck it, why not? I'll talk about it too. Yeah, I'll let Dan know. That's tomorrow's video.